So we are now just a day away from the June 3rd presidential election, which will finally fill the country's months-long power vacuum. We have our political correspondent Oh Soo-young in studio to discuss how the race currently looks and what could determine its outcome. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy. It's great to be here again.
So, Soo-young, let's start with the early voting that closed last Friday with quite a high turnout. Now, tell us more, and what might this indicate about this election race?
Right, so 15.4 million out of some 44 million eligible voters for this election, they cast their ballots early this time around. And this reached a figure of 34.74% for the turnout. And it wasn't a record-breaking figure as expected, as the numbers began lagging behind on the second day of voting. But it does still mark the second highest turnout for early voting in a nationwide election since the system was first introduced in 2014. Now, that means over 1 in 3 people have already voted. And by region, the Honam area, traditionally a Democratic Party stronghold, once again recorded the highest turnout, surpassing 50%. And among them, Jeollanam-do province posted the highest early rate at 56.5%. In contrast, though, the lowest turnout was recorded in Daegu, which is, of course, a conservative People Power Party stronghold, and it recorded 25.63%, and that's down from 33.9% in the last presidential election in 2022. Another noteworthy point, early voting rates were lower than the national average in the Seoul capital area, which includes Incheon and Gyeonggi-do province. Now, these areas are considered swing voter strongholds with high proportions of undecided voters. Gyeonggi-do province in particular has the most voters, accounting for 26% of the population, followed by Seoul at 18.7% and Busan at 6.5%. So a high turnout in early voting in progressive regions of the country does indicate, I would say, a stronger leaning towards the Democratic Party candidate, as polls have also consistently shown. But conservative voters, they do have the tendency to cast their votes on the actual election day. And there are, of course, the undecided voters as well. So there's room to flip the race, though with a very small margin, I would say.
Indeed. And speaking of swing voters, you've mentioned it's the people in their 20s and 30s who are a major force in determining the election result.
Right, of course, we've discussed this before, and yes, it does really come down to the swing voter, especially in any election, I would say, with very established political factions. And in Korea's case, against the backdrop of strong regionalism seen over the decades, we're seeing a distinct generational differences emerge as a major factor. Now, people in their 40s and 50s, they tend to be left-leaning, while those in their 60s, 70s and over are traditionally conservative. So this in recent years has led to very tight races. Now, those aged 39 and under, though, they are, of course, significantly smaller, but increasingly they're becoming more significant as their numbers could impact the outcome, as they very much did in the last presidential election.
So the 20s and 30s crowd, they're not really, or they're less tied to any party or any region. So younger voters are done playing by political rules written even before they were born. So they couldn't care less about dusty political brands or who your political mentor was and those kind of stuff. So these young voters, they want real opportunities, real policies that actually make a difference to their lives.
For young voters, their biggest concerns are employment and social security. They want change to reform the overstretched national pension as well as health insurance system, which they're paying for but are unlikely to benefit from. They'd also like to see steps towards environmental sustainability and a vision for the country. Among the 20s and 30s age groups, there has been a growing number of those backing Reform Party candidate Lee Jun-seok. But of course, his support base is rather precarious, as 20 and 30-somethings tend to have a lower turnout and they're open to changing their minds about the candidate. Of course, Lee Jun-seok also faces some systematic limitations as well as a third-party candidate.
So Korea's presidential election is based on this system, so winner takes all, no runoffs, and that favors the big two parties and that crushes anything in between. So South Korean voters tend to think why waste my vote on someone who can't win? So they hold their noses and vote for the lesser evil. So compare that to, for example, New Zealand. So since adopting what we call mixed member proportional system in the 90s, the coalition politics has become the norm here.
Now, Seong, I do have to mention again, this is an unusual election as it's occurring 2 years ahead of the actual schedule after the former President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment, right?
That's right. So that means that the next president will take power within a day of after a clear winner is indicated by the polls, and that's likely to be the early hours of Wednesday. We can then expect to see an inauguration ceremony that day, and the next leader assuming his duties right away without a transition committee. So without having a transition committee that helps the new administration learn the ropes, the next government is really going to have to land running. And all three main candidates, they have indicated, though, that they'll first attend to economic matters first.
The first domestic priority must be fixing the economy for ordinary people, period. So whether it's Lee Jae-myung or someone else, there's no room for ceremonial waffle or something. Sky-high prices, unemployment, housing market shocks, and struggling small businesses. Younger people are frustrated about their economic situation. They're crushing the Korean public. So Korean people are not just frustrated, they're exhausted. So the new president must immediately start addressing those cost of living pressures and job market issues, especially for young people.
Well, polls will be open tomorrow on Tuesday from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And of course, we'll be covering it throughout the day live. Thank you, Seong, for coming in today.
Thanks, Tammy. It's been fun covering this with you.